Today we'll be going over Xbox Acquisition Secrets, a collection of targets and companies that Xbox was interested in acquiring not really too long ago. Be sure to like the video, subscribing is great as well. So from the court case of Microsoft versus the FTC in the United States, they were kind of going over whether or not they get to buy Activision Blizzard, and a whole bunch of documents were made available where Microsoft has been looking for a ton of companies, or looking at a ton of companies to try to acquire things that kind of fill certain gaps in the library at Xbox Game Studios and beyond. So this was from April 2021. I did actually check and get permission from Microsoft to do this video and take a look at these documents. They said go nuts with the court stuff, and I was like, okay, sure, why not? So yeah, Q4 F21 or FY21, April 2021 was where these details are from. So they were filtering out from like 1,000 companies that they were looking at. Here's the top consideration set. As you can tell, there is a lot of really top tier studios and, publishers that the company was looking at. You know, we've got everything, like a number of these companies. I was even like, this should be on the list for Microsoft to look at because they work on a lot of games with Microsoft where they do support work. You know, like Asobo Studios, things like Certain Affinity, very smart purchases to support the overall team. And there are some slides that dive deeper into things. There was redacted slides, which I can only assume are slides where they're actually really intricately looking at buying maybe said company. But anyways, it's just kind of fascinating to dive into this because this type of information literally never leaks in gaming. You never get to see this kind of stuff. It is fascinating. Like, acquisition details in gaming are incredibly rare. So yeah, they've got everything from Avalanche Studios to Behaviour Interactive to CD Projekt Red, Crytek, Don't Nod, From Software, Funcom, Gearbox, which is now over at Embracer, so obviously that's not going to happen. Harmonix, which is now over at Epic, so that's not going to happen. And that's the thing, is like some of these studios have already been, purchased and whatnot, in what I call an era of, the consolidation era in gaming, which is really quite fascinating. But that's just a huge list of different options. Now, there was a sort of finalists list and a sort of finalist watch list. So we've got the final watch list here. So a very core of this is they want mobile-driven companies. That's, they're trying to build and launch a third mobile competing store, so they need mobile groups. That's why you got things like Niantic, who do Pokemon Go and whatnot. You got things like Zynga, but Zynga was purchased by Take-Two. Bungie was purchased by Sony Interactive. So those ones are off the table. That's why I've kind of marked them in red. So here's the top candidates for console and PC expansion. Housemarque Qui, obviously off the list. Bungie, obviously off the list. But you can tell some of the companies that Microsoft has had a long sort of, or more recent, larger relationship with. It almost seems like they're kind of trying to test out these different companies to see the value that they could bring to Xbox Game Pass, and the concepts that Xbox is working towards at the current point in time. Behaviour Interactive, who do Dead by Daylight. People Can Fly, who just signed a AAA $50 million agreement to make a game for Xbox exclusively. Remedy, you've got 11-Bit Studios, Bohemia Interactive. You got Crytek, IO Interactive, Larian Studios, Manticore Games, Playdead, Rebellion Developments, Thunderful, Supergiant Games, Paradox Interactive, and Sega as publishers. That's right, Sega is part of the list. It's really neat. And then we have this list of developers to watch. So these are ones where they're kind of like, okay, let's keep an eye long-term on these and see what we got here. But even this list in itself is really quite interesting and impressive. You've got things like basically Ember Lab, who did Kenna Bridge of Spirits. You've got Fat Shark, Vermintide, Darktide. You got Ghost Ship Games for Deep Rock Galactic, which I think would be a really good pickup there. Great studio. Hazelight Studios, who did A Way Out, It Takes Two, which I really thought were under EA, but yeah, that would be a great studio because they actually make literal award winners, right? You've got Hello Games for No Man's Sky. You've got Munfish for Atomic Heart, Team Cherry, who did Hollow Knight. You've got Striking Distance Studios that did the Callisto Protocol. You can see that Xbox, and in general Microsoft, was looking at a huge list of potential companies that could really broaden and offer exciting new opportunities to help grow the Xbox brand, whether that's in console or PC. It's fascinating. So let's dive a little bit deeper into some of the individual groups. I didn't include all of the slides. I included the ones that I thought were of the most interest to people in general. So the numbers that I think you should take a look at first and foremost are that the three metrics that really seem to matter are Steam numbers, Game Pass hours, and Twitch view time. That seems to be the metrics that matter most for these individual purchases. And Sega I started with because Sega actually has the most extensive, like there's a whole other PDF document that we didn't include or go over that really goes, like there really was an intent at some point to buy Sega. Sega said they're not necessarily up for acquisition at the current point in time, but I'm sure if there was money and whatnot that this could happen. And like I had said earlier, when you talk about acquisitions are not something that leak. They really aren't. They just happen, they get announced, and it goes forth. So it's really interesting to see these breakdowns and to be able to go over this stuff. So they also have a couple key points: the strategic rationale for each company purchase and the risks. And the risks usually are minority stake purchases, sort of like complexities or issues with said studios. And the strategic rationale is always like, what does this team bring to the table? Obviously Sega with a lot of IP, risks, kind of public elements, and investment complications. And it's just a very complicated company. But let's move over to Paradox Interactive and let's kind of break this down. So Paradox Interactive, from what I kind of get the gist of the notes here, is they are a studio that's really good for PC content and user-generated content in games. The ability to produce steady flow of DLC per title, with a strong focus on live opportunities, and they have notable IP ownership: Crusader Kings, Europa Universalis, Stellaris, Battletech, City Skylines, and Prison Architect. But they do have risks. They are a public company, and they have a minority stake from Tencent. So that is always an issue that complicates things, is minority stakes, having to pay everything out, all that kind of stuff. And it's really neat because you can look at each of these companies, and you can see their kind of expected release schedule. Again, with this going back to April 2021, which at this point is a couple of years old, but these are, recent enough kind of documents where you can get an idea of the gist of where production was, where these companies were going, what they were setting up, and what some of the goals were, even from their perspective and for Microsoft's perspective in regards to like what these companies have to offer, what they can do. There even is a nice little additional info kind of thing where it just kind of breaks down some side notes, not notes that necessarily impact the strategic rationale or cause risks, but just kind of like little info bits where you would add this. Like basically someone is creating this list and being like, hey, here are targets that we could get that offer benefits. So here's all the info that we can provide. It's just like little fascinating note details. So this is Rebellion. So I've always really liked the Rebellion games, and their details are really interesting. So strategic rationale, we have steady content release cadence supporting multiple platforms, technical expertise via development/support of the proprietary Azura engine, a stable company with a long history in the industry, and lots of notable IP ownership: Sniper Elite, Zombie Army, Strange Brigade, Evil Genius 2000 AD, and Battlezone. Now the risks: broadly questionable quality and content, overlap in genre and tone of other Xbox Game Studio franchises. They also mentioned for additional information that Rebellion is actually kind of a large company in terms of the variety of stuff they do. They have a film TV studio, a book comic publisher, and a board game business. So for them, it's kind of like you'd get a good amount of content, you get a good amount of variety of stuff, but their kind of stuff is all over the place too. They do different types of games, they do different types of offerings, but obviously, if you have looked in the past, Xbox has had a history of, Game Pass basically using and supporting a number of Rebellion titles, Zombie Army, Sniper Elite 5 debuted on the platform. So an acquisition actually would make a lot of strategic sense and would kind of bridge the gap between, having to pay for that kind of stuff and just having it be available to help grow the Xbox platform. I personally I really like Rebellion stuff, so pretty cool company there. So here we have Bohemia Interactive. Now this one really, really fascinates me because, I do actually play a lot of Bohemia titles, right? Like we cover a lot of that, DayZ, stuff like that. So for this one, I thought the risks and the information here were just really, really quite fascinating. So the strategic rationale is PC-centric with large modding community, extensive experience with simulation games, live ops expertise through supporting model with all recent releases, technical capabilities through developing proprietary Infusion technology or Infusion engine, and notable IP ownership of DayZ, Arma, and Vigor. Risks. Recent releases, Wildlands and Vigor, have failed to find commercial or critical success, which sucks because the latter is actually something I really enjoy, and my face is on a bag in it. Go check it out, it's awesome. And they also mention poor technical performance on console games, typically buggy. Yep, if anyone has ever played DayZ, you know exactly what they're talking about there, across all the platforms, which is hilarious. And a minority stake from Tencent. So additional information is that they are actually actively working on DayZ 2. We didn't know DayZ 2 was a thing, but DayZ 2 is actually being worked on, which is fascinating. They are also going to move into mobile PC with Wildlands in China, which should be a good build-up for them. And apparently they don't like PC Game Pass for DayZ, but they want it for console, which is interesting. Now we move on to Larian Studios. So if you're not familiar with them, they make the Divinity franchise. And I didn't think that this would be necessarily a target or something of full interest for Xbox. But then I kind of look at it and I'm like, it makes sense, but there is also quite a bit of overlap. So the strategic rationale, PC-centric, proprietary engine and tools, strong community following and engagement, Divinity Original Sin and Divinity Sin, or Original Sin 2 are two of the highest rated RPGs of the last decade. They have risks, development dispersed between 6 studio locations, which is quite spread out, and overlap with Xbox Game Studios, and overlap with inXile and Obsidian because basically they make very, very similar games. Now, if Xbox is trying to really dominate in the Western RPG market, or in general have like all the RPG games, which seem to be big sellers for a lot of people, this would be a good way to continue to beef up that support. So additional info, majority shareholders are Sven Vinicki and his wife. So you just really have to go for like a particular target in order to make this happen, right? Now, they were also looking for minor external investments, but we don't know if that happened. So that is a company that is looking for an influx, and that is a company that would be perhaps a little easier to buy, and they are really working on Baldur's Gate 3, which is, coming to consoles and whatnot. So there we go. We move on to Behaviour Interactive. So they are known for Dead by Daylight, which is obviously something a lot of us enjoy. But they got Meteor Maker, and they're working on a variety of things. So they are actually building up and doing some other titles. So the strategic rationale is established foundation of tools, tech, and process for live ops. The companies in this day and age for gaming love live service games or live ops experiences. Establish mobile development and publishing division. Dead by Daylight mobile is massive. The ability to scale quickly in WFH and end-to-end service, possible code dev solutions for Xbox Game Studios. Because like I said, a lot of studios need supporting studios and help, and they can do that. They also have a favorable burn rate, and the notable IP ownership is Dead by Daylight. Now the risks, inconsistent quality on WFH code dev projects. Example, inconsistency in results between 343 and the Coalition. So basically they did support work and the results were mixed. Unable to deliver on another strong original IP since Dead by Daylight. However, the company's current project, Upforce Arena, I don't know if that became Meteor Maker or if that's a different one, looked promising. And in 2019, NetEase made a minority stake investment in Behaviour. So Behaviour is more of a target for supporting Xbox Game Studios and some development that they can handle themselves. So that brings us to Remedy Entertainment, a company that I would absolutely love to see under the Xbox brand. They have a long-term history with Microsoft that did sour a bit, it looks like, during the Xbox One era after Quantum Break released. But as you can tell, they were definitely of interest to, Microsoft as a company to add into the fold. And I think the reasons for this particular thing make a lot of sense too. They are one of the last remaining independent AAA narrative-driven game developers, which are very hard to come across these days. Existing IP value, a healthy community following Alan Wake and Control in the Sam Lake universe, IP ownership of Control and Alan Wake, But Risks, they are a public company with a market cap of 600 euros. I think that's 600 million, and I think that was at that time. It's obviously changed. And their next two games are tied to the Epic Games Store, Alan Wake 2 and Alan Wake Remastered. It also looks like they do have marketing for Alan Wake 2 with PlayStation, and they also have an agreement with Rockstar to do the remakes of Alan Wake or of Max Payne 1 and 2, which isn't on this list and is something updated that I wanted to add for additional information. But Control has sold well. Project Vanguard looks like it's going along very well, and it's just kind of like the studio where it's like, what kind of like, sort of ownership and or agreements do they have that could damage this sort of purchase, but I think they are a company personally that's really worth grabbing and would be smart to acquire. This is People Can Fly, where they have, as I've mentioned, signed an agreement with Xbox to make an exclusive title, which I'm assuming is going to be their sort of trial to see if there's somebody to bring into the fold of Xbox Game Studios. So the strategic rationale include, despite the technical server network issues during release, Outriders was a critical and commercial success. The real-time technical challenges that the developer faced will likely have added valuable experience to the company for future projects. Outriders has now surpassed Borderlands 2 and 3 all-time highs on Steam concurrent users. Game continues to perform well in building a healthy gaming community. Notable ownership, Bulletstorm. Risks went IPO in 2020, current market cap 550 million USD, so they would cost a little bit to grab, more so than I would say other companies that will likely have changed that number too. They're developing two projects, one with Take-Two and another new project with Square Enix in addition to Outriders. Both 40 to 50 million euro projects, subject to releasing in 2023, adds complication to the acquisition. So I don't know if one of those projects kind of merged into what Xbox has working with them, but it is a fascinating sort of company. It is actually interesting to see that Outriders did well with it being on Game Pass, and I guess it makes sense to kind of add them into the fold as another company that can develop shooter-type games, something that's a little crazy, something a little over the top, and it should be really interesting to see what happens there. So Crytek is one that I've heard for so many years as being a rumored acquisition. They've worked with Xbox on numerous things. They're a company that makes a lot of sense. They're experienced in self-publishing and currently operating 4 development studios. They're proficient in live ops and VR development. Their technical capabilities include studio develops / licenses CryEngine and has experience supporting / launching on multiple platforms. Notable IP ownership, Crysis, Hunt, and The Climb. Risks and overlap in target audience with Xbox Game Studios, and historical business management. They have requested advance against future royalties in the past to keep the company afloat. So that's always been an issue with Crytek, at least for quite a while, is they are a company that has sort of struggled here or there, which is why an acquisition at some point very likely makes sense. But they are working on Crysis 4. They do have some stuff in the pipeline. Some of their live service stuff is handled well and still going. So it makes sense that something like this would be something that you could add and help build up. Obviously, there is that Rise IP that would be interesting to see them perhaps revisit something like that. And maybe something in secret is actually on the way too in that regard, because that would be a unique opportunity to grow that franchise, but I'm sure they're all hands on deck for Crysis 4 after the situation with how the other Crysis remasters did release. So an interesting acquisition to look at. So here's the Thunderful Group. I quite like them. They were rebranded at some point, and these ones are more of like a content gap fill-in. So they're a company where they have a good steady track record with IP that does well, tracks well. They just don't have necessarily a big hit yet. There is some ownership questions in regards to the value, and their one project didn't do too well with EA, but EA continues to put money into them, so it shows that there is potential there, or that Electronic Arts sees potential in this company. I also see potential in this company too. They got stuff like SteamWorld, Lost in Random, The Gunk, pretty fun, different types of titles, a good amount of variety, and I think that offers a lot of value. And then we move on to our final one, which is IO Interactive. So this is a company where they've made a ton of different games. They have a long history. They're working on Project Dragon, which is going to be exclusive to Xbox, an RPG shooter. They're working on Project 007, which is obviously the new Bond. They have a 20-year established history, can ship a game every 2 years. They own proprietary technology. They've transformed into games as service. But there are questions, lots of questions about building and shrinking and building and shrinking. And, what is the management stuff? But IO Interactive definitely has been one Xbox has been looking at, and I believe trialing because of Project Dragon. I hope you found this acquisition news to be interesting, exciting. If you did, liking the video is great, subscribing is great as well, and I'd love to dive in and chat about this further if you have other questions.